Hey everybody, welcome to the Evening Reader. Welcome. There's some new people, I think, out there, and welcome back if you have been around for a while. Um, I'm here today to talk about my favorite books of 2023. This is the third or fourth attempt for me to do this video. I keep doing it and it's too long, and my editing skills are not such that I can actually get it together and edit it down to where I want it to be. So here I am, filming one more time. Hope to get this up today. It's Friday. I hope that you've had a good semi first week of the new year and that things are going well for you out there. Let's see. I want to start today talking about first, these are my favorite books. These are not necessarily the best books. And I know some people don't really make a distinction between favorite and best, but I do. In terms of, I think, I can think of some of the best books that I read this year are books that clearly showed a lot of skill, a lot of mastery. They were good books to read. They held my attention, but I maybe didn't necessarily connect with them emotionally. And I think the perfect example for me of that book was Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. I sometimes as I was reading it, I would connect with Demon, but for the most part, I just didn't. I kind of flip-flopped, and now that I've gotten some distance from it because I read it in August, I I still feel a bit like Demon himself, that he was just a mouthpiece for Barbara Kingsolver. And although the voice, is in a way authentic in terms of that, she created a unique voice and then she sustains it for 500 plus pages, which is no mean feat. I mean, there are lots of terrific authors who don't always manage to do that. She really, really stuck it there. And I think I have never read David Copperfield, but I'm assuming based on other reviews that I've listened to that she also did a good job porting over the framework of David Copperfield and making it into something new. But I just never could get over the fact that she had decided to use this framework and then had made up this voice so that basically she could get a message across, so that she could, put her views out there about what the opioid crisis was like in Appalachia and what it's like to live in that part of the country. And, I totally understand if other people feel differently, but it just kept me from connecting with the book. A second example, which will lead me into one of my best books, was the book Romantic Comedy by Curtis Sittenfeld, which I absolutely loved and I thought really worked as a romantic comedy, which is just typically not my genre. And even though I really enjoyed every minute of it and I gave it 5 stars, and I will definitely reread it, and I do think it was, it's definitely in the top 20 of my best books, probably. I read 2 other books by Sittenfeld this year. I read Sisterland, which was one of her much earlier novels, and then I also read Rodham. And Rodham absolutely makes my list this year as one of the best books that I read this year. I just have been thinking about that book a lot, and I just thought it was so well done to be able to take a person who is a real person who is alive now, and still walking around and living her life, and inhabit her voice and inhabit her being, if you will, and then give her an alternate future and make her, have her make different choices than she has actually made in her life, and then follow those through to the end. I just thought that Sittenfeld did a fantastic job. And that's not easy. I can't imagine the guts it takes to have, and the empathy that it takes to really try to get into somebody's head and write them an alternate story. And I felt like she did a good job having that version of Hillary Rodham make the decisions that she made, and not always. And it wasn't like this book is not about redeeming Hillary Clinton or Hillary Rodham. It's not about taking her out of the life that she had with Bill Clinton and somehow giving her some better life, or necessarily a better husband or anything, or that she doesn't make mistakes, because she does also in Rodham. She does still make mistakes. She does still have some of the same logic. She's the same person, but I just thought that it was very impressive, an impressive book, an absorbing read, just fantastic. So I love Curtis Sittenfeld. I think she's always anytime there's a book from her, it's gonna make my list. So there it is. There's my first best book of 2023. The next best book that I read in 2023 is one I read. It was the first book I read last year, and so it was before I had the channel, which I started in March. And that is Zori by Laird Hunt. This is the first book by Laird Hunt that I've ever read. And Zori is just one of those quiet slice of life novels. It's set in the Midwest. It starts in the 1920s with a girl named Zori who was born, and then it just follows her through her life. And it sort of just is one of those books that makes the ordinary extraordinary, and is also just beautifully written. So I enjoyed it thoroughly. It's a terrific novel. It's a slim little novel. I'm not going to say I highly recommend it after every single one of these, because these are the best books that I read this year. So, of course, I may still slip and do that, but obviously, I highly recommend it. So, there you go. The next best book that I read this year was by an author that I really love and hardly ever hear anybody talking about here on BookTube, and that is Jennifer Haigh. It looks like her name would be pronounced Haigh, Haigh, but it's pronounced like the city, or like Americans pronounce the city here in the Netherlands, The Hague. It's Jennifer Haigh. So anyway, this book is her fourth novel, and it's called Faith. It was published in 2011. And it is a story with a first-person narrator, a woman named Sheila. She's in her, I think, probably her late 40s. And her older half-brother is a priest, and he is accused of sexual abuse. This takes place in Boston right around the time, in the early 2000s, right around the time that the same scandal broke that was broken by the Boston Globe, that was featured in the movie Spotlight. And Sheila lives far away from her family. She is somewhat estranged from them, and also somewhat estranged from her own faith. But when she hears about what's happened to Arthur, she comes home, and she starts her own investigation into these allegations. Because the church is dragging its feet and sort of wanting to push it away and not deal with things. And Arthur is in really a sort of purgatory. And so she begins to do interviews and investigate things herself, and ends up writing a sort of almost like a gospel, if you will, about her brother. And it's an interesting choice for Haigh to do this in several ways. Because, it's a difficult subject matter. Obviously, the church sex abuse scandal, a highly sensitive and very, very difficult topic. But also for her to decide to look at it from the point of view of one of the members of the family of the accused, and to try to put together what could have happened. And I'm not going to give away the ending. I'm not going to give anything away, but it's a very thorough and fascinating look. and very, very well written. So highly recommend that one if you have read anything else by her. And if you haven't, I would. It's like you could start anywhere. I think she's just a terrific writer. The next book that I read, I didn't read Faith. I read before I started the channel, and this next book I started right before I started this channel. Or actually, no, I started it in December 2023, but I was still reading it when I started this channel. And that is a nonfiction book called Ninth Street Women by Mary Gabriel. And Ninth Street Women is about 5 American women abstract expressionist painters: Lee Krasner, Elaine de Kooning, Grace Hardigan, Helen Frankenthaler, and Joan Mitchell. And this book tries to kind of put them back in their place. They've been really sort of written out of American art history, except as wives. Lee Krasner was married to Jackson Pollock. Elaine de Kooning was married to Willem de Kooning. And so, of course, they're still in the picture because their husbands are probably the most prominent American abstract expressionist painters. Everybody who knows about modern art knows who they are. But these women really had very pivotal and influential roles, both their artwork and then also just in the community in that area of New York, and within that the group of painters and poets and art critics and art gallery owners and museum curators who became so influential and really formed the world of modern art and modern art criticism as we know it. And if the book has a flaw, it's probably that Gabriel she clearly just did a ton of research, very meticulous research, and she really, really puts in everything but the kitchen sink. And so if the book has a flaw, it's that it needed an editor. There are places where it loses its narrative momentum. It bogs down in too much detail. But that said, it's still worth reading if any of these areas interest you: women in art, modern art, American abstract expressionism, any of those things. She did, I think, achieve what she set out to achieve. I do just wish that she'd had maybe a better editor. But it's completely worth reading. I haven't stopped thinking about it or talking about it or recommending it to people. So very, very good book. The next book on my list is Lonesome Dove, which was a reread for me. This was the 3rd time that I have read this book. Both of the other times that I read it were in the 90s. So I first read it in 1990. Wow, that's a long time ago. And then again, probably like around 1997. And then I read it this year for June on the Range. This was a buddy read with Randy Ray. And we kind of got off track on the buddy read, but I think he also really loved it. I just was blown away. I mean, it was almost like reading it for the first time. I've always counted it as one of my favorites. It's been one of those books that, you tell people, oh, I love that book. That's the best book. And then when you go back to read it again, you're like, oh, I hope this really is the best book. And it truly, truly was. I mean, there's even a scene there in that where I had to put the book down and I've bawled for maybe an hour, and I'm not a crier at books. It's just so well done. And it's funny to me that Larry McMurtry has said many times that he wrote this book to be the anti-Western. He grew up in West Texas. His whole family were cattle ranchers or cowboys, and he just wanted to dispel the romantic myth of the American West and the cowboy. And of course now, what is it? It is probably America's most beloved Western. A fact about which he was mostly just would shrug and sigh. What are you going to do when the work leaves your hands? It's not yours anymore. So, and I have to look at my list here. I've done this so many times. You'd think I'd have all the books memorized, but I'm like, okay, which one's next? The next book was a book that I picked up for Trans Girl April. And that is Nevada by Imogen Binney. And this was actually reissued. It was first published in 2012. And I believe it was one of the first novels published by a major publisher by a trans author. And so that's why it was kind of a big deal. And the version that I read was I just said the word. A reissue. It was a reissue, and it has a new afterword by Binney herself. And this is a terrific, terrific book. Marie is a punk trans woman in her late 20s, early 30s. She lives in New York City. She works at a bookstore based on the Strand, or it might be the Strand. I can't remember exactly. And lives in New York with her girlfriend. And she's sort of, it's all in first, her sections are all in first person. She's witty. She's intelligent. Lots of references to literature, to music, to pop culture. And really just instantly engaging voice. And she's just telling us about her life and how she's having difficulty trying to, it's kind of a coming of age story as well, because she really isn't sure where she fits. She's not sure where she's going in life. But, then she's got the added layer of, as a trans woman, she doesn't really know what world she belongs in. Do I belong, how do I go into this, just, can I be in a normal, she's like, I don't fit in a hetero world. I don't necessarily fit like in a gay world. There's other factions of her. She's not sure. She's not sure where she fits. Anyway, she finds out that her girlfriend's cheating on her, and she kind of just loses it and ends up stealing her girlfriend's car, buying some heroin, and deciding to go on a road trip. And I don't know. She's one of those characters where you feel like if she could just get it together, she could just get it together. So even as she's doing this and she's doing all this crazy stuff, you're like, oh, I hope this works. So she hits the road, and then the book turns to a new character, a boy named James, who is like 19 years old, and he lives in a town in northern Nevada that's literally like the town that Walmart built. The whole town is built around a gigantic Walmart supercenter. And James and pretty much everybody else in the town works at the Walmart or works at some business that, is adjacent to the Walmart. And he has a girlfriend. He lives his life just in a cloud of pot smoke. He's always stoned. And he's got kind of a secret obsession and a secret life that he doesn't want anybody to know about. And he's at work one day, and he works like, I think, if I remember correctly, like either in electronics or the media section of the Walmart. And in walks Maria. And when Maria sees James, she knows instantly, somehow. She just gets this intuition that he is a trans woman, that he is actually trans, but he just has not figured it out yet. And they start talking, and then they eventually end up taking a road trip of their own. And it just is, it's just fascinating look at people at two different stages of figuring out who they are and where they're going and what they want to be, and their lives intersecting for that moment. And it was just fantastic, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So that was the next one. The next one on my list, trying to go fast, and it's still taking forever. Station 11. Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel, which was published in 2014, and I have had on my Kindle since January 2015. And I just got around to reading it this year because it was one of those books that was so popular, I was afraid it wasn't going to live up to the hype. Well, it lived up to the hype and then some. I thought that it was absolutely fantastic. It's a kind of a complicated book to describe, but it kicks off with an actor on stage who keels over during a performance. And then we learn very quickly that there is an illness spreading, and this illness spreads, and becomes basically a pandemic and very quickly kills most of the world's population. And then we're catapulted forward 20 years to meet a traveling symphony that's made up of actors and musicians who are traveling around the coast of Michigan to, entertain survivors and like people in the towns there. And this troupe contains a young girl who was at that earlier performance 20 years before. And we're seeing who she is now and the kind of life that she's living and how people are living. And it's just, it's not really a pandemic novel. You don't see the pandemic. You see a lot about before the pandemic, and then you see a lot about the present day and what's happening. But we meet a lot of characters and we start to see their lives intersecting in different ways. And in a lot of ways, it's a very hopeful book. It's not a dark, apocalyptic book the way so many of those types of books are. And I don't know how to describe it. All I can say is read it, and I can't wait to read the next two books, which it's not technically a series, but still involves some of the characters and I think some of the themes. And that's The Glass Hotel and Sea of Tranquility. I really love Emily St. John Mandel. I think I have most of her books in my possession now, and I can't wait to read all of them. So the next book on my list I definitely won't go on and on about is Tom Lake by Ann Patchett. I just thought it was absolutely fantastic. I think it's her best book, although I just started rereading Bel Canto, and I don't know, maybe Bel Canto is her best book. This is going to make me crazy. But Tom Lake, yes, is about a woman in the present day. It's the summer of 2020, so COVID is out in the world, and she is home on her cherry farm, and her 3 daughters are with her and her husband, and they're quarantined there, and they have they've pestered her into telling the story of a relationship that she had with an actor, a famous actor named Peter Duke, long ago. And so she embarks on telling them the story of her relationship with Peter Duke, and also sort of the story of her acting career, her earlier acting career that she gave up to be on this farm and have this family. And it's just, I don't know, it's just a really beautiful story, so well told. At the center of it is Thornton Wilder's Our Town. I could just wax rhapsodical about it, so I'm not going to. I'm going to keep on going. And the next book on my list is The Stromness Dinner by Peter Benson. I learned about this book from Angelia because she was doing a book haul, and she was talking about why she had hauled it. I believe she had picked it up, like I'm holding the book. I believe she'd picked it up because of Sean the Book Maniac. And it just sounded intriguing. It sounded really, I don't know, it sounded nice. And so I bought it and I read it right away. And it really was a terrific and heartwarming book. The main character is a man named Ed Beach. He's in his late 20s. He works as a renovator and a contractor with his father, together with his father. He has a good relationship with his father. He has a good relationship with his mother and sister, the whole family. They're very close. He's relatively content with his life. And, he lives still at home, but he's enjoying himself. He loves to cook. He likes to go out to the pub, and he's got several girlfriends. And then, one day he meets a man named Marcus, who is from a different sort of echelon than he is. Marcus is very posh. And they meet, and Marcus asks Ed if he could come do some renovations for him at his flat. And Ed does, and they form kind of a friendship, really. And then when Marcus's father dies, he calls Ed and says, "My father had a house in the Orkneys. My sister and I would like to sell the house. And, could you do some renovations on it before we put it on the market?" And, Ed thinks about it, and he is kind of at a point in his life where maybe he's ready to make some changes, but he's just not sure what those changes might be. And he says yes, maybe this is what he needs. Maybe this is a thing that he's going to do. And so he says yes, and he goes up to the Orkneys, and he, he just, he really ends up liking it. He kind of gets entangled in a bit of a mystery. And then Marcus's sister Claire shows up, and, I don't know, maybe a little romance ensues. Anyway, it's a really, really heartwarming book. Just absolutely terrific. Ed is a great character to spend time with. So I highly recommend it. I think this was one of Angelia's best books of the year also. And then I will see if I can find Sean's video, and I'll put it down below as well. The next one on my list was a buddy read with Jess, Stalking Kafka, and another book that we read for Nonfiction November together for Nonfiction November. And that is Say Nothing by Patrick Radden Keefe. Just a stunning book about the provisional IRA in the later troubles from starting in the late 60s all the way up to around 2016, 2017. The book was published in 2018. It covers, a broad range of time. It covers a lot of different characters and events. And, I hate to say it, but I wish that Mary Gabriel had Patrick Radden Keefe's editor, or maybe Patrick Radden Keefe was her editor, because it also is meticulously researched. But let me tell you, it just from the opening incident, which is the abduction of a woman named Jean McConville in her apartment in front of, I can't remember the number of the 10 children that she had, like 6 of her 10 children, and she just disappears one night in December 1972. You are hard in this book, and you won't want to put it down. It reads like the best possible thriller, except with depth and emotion. And just definitely one of the best nonfiction books I've ever read. Maybe one of the best books I've ever read, period. So the next book is a book that I've never talked about on the channel. I don't even think I mentioned that I read it. And I read it in November when I went home to the States. And that is The Bandit Queens by Parini Shroff. And a lot of people were talking about this book earlier this year because it was longlisted for the Women's Prize. I can't remember if it made the short list, but wow, it was a debut novel and completely stunning and just really, really terrific. So it starts off with our main character is named Gita. She is a woman who has been on her own for about 5 years. Her husband disappeared, but the rest of her village believes that she murdered him. And in those 5 years, she has built a small but stable life for herself. She's got a little business. She has ambitions of buying a refrigerator. She's doing okay for herself, even though she's lonely. She doesn't, she's somewhat exiled because people, there's rumors that she's a witch and so on and so forth. And her whole world just turns upside down one day when one of the women from her microloan group, and that's like I won't go into what a microloan group is, you can look that up, but one of the women from her microloan group shows up at her doorstep and asks for help to kill her abusive husband. And that just sets off this wonderful, wonderful book. This is a wonderful story. It's a difficult story, though. I mean, it covers some very serious issues. Violence against women, patriarchy, domestic abuse, caste systems, economic difficulty. It covers a lot of issues, but somehow it manages to be rollicking fun. And there's so much humor. But the humor fits the book. And it's also a book about friendship and about coming together and about found family, really. And I saw some reviews on Goodreads said they weren't sure about the humor. They didn't really feel like maybe the humor belonged there. And I don't know. I thought that was I disagree with that. I think that the humor actually elevated the book. And I kind of also wondered, you know, well, I don't know. I won't get into that. Anyway, because I don't know, this is not a book review. Just read it. Just trust me, you'll like it. My final book, I don't really have to talk about because I just did a video on it, and that's Lucy by the Sea. I'll link that video down below. Really, all the Lucy books, because Lucy Barton, My Name is Lucy Barton, Oh William, and Lucy by the Sea, I just reread in December, and they were all, yeah, just wonderful. So, highly recommended. Here I am. It's just over 30 minutes. That's better. That's the best I've done. I've probably left a lot out. I'll probably regret that later, but that's okay. We got it done. If you have questions for me, you can leave them in the description below. Let me know if you've read any of these books or if any of these sound good to you. And let me know what your favorite book or your favorite books of the year were. I would love to hear. I would love to know. And as always, thank you so much for being here. If you're still here, if you're still hanging around. And I will look forward to seeing you in the next video, which will probably be the first version, or the first edition, the first half, the first part of the Q&A. Yeah. So, gotta get it. I'm gonna get there. I'm gonna get there. All right. Well, I hope that you have a terrific Friday or a terrific weekend, or whenever you're watching this. I hope things are going well for you, and I will see you in the next one. Take care. Bye.